We're going to move into the next phase of the workshop, which is basically how to do a systems assessment and a causal loop analysis. I'm going to take you through the steps, and then I'm going to take you through a case study to give you an idea of what are the things you would put into a causal assessment. So step one, after you've identified your issues, to identify what is your impact of that key issue. And you would identify both your direct impacts and your indirect impacts. And as you can see, it fans out and it becomes greater, the impact, because of the indirect impacts. Then what we want you to do is identify the causes of the issue. And this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated, and this is where we call it, like I said, we call those the controlling variables, because these are the things that you potentially could change through an intervention. We want you to look at what you think the direct causes are of the key issue, and then what the indirect causes are of the issue. And then what we want you to do is to look at what the feedback loops are. So step 3 would be looking at the feedback loops. So one impact might go back to an indirect cause, another one might go to a cause. Sometimes your impacts are actually a cause. So for example, an impact can be poverty, but poverty can often be a cause of a key issue. So sometimes you can have both causes being the same thing as your impacts. And you'll see in the next case study that I'll show you. What we want you to do is to have a look to when we say whether these feedback loops are both positive or negative. Positive means that it's actually amplifying that negative impact, and negative means it's dampening. So positive doesn't mean it's making it better, it means it's making it worse. So it's amplifying it, and then, so positive is amplifying. And then the final step will be to identify interventions to break the cycle. What's really important when you start to look at interventions, what we've found in the work that we've been doing, is that you can sometimes have interventions at the cause level, but often in order to really address the issue, you need to find interventions that address the indirect causes, because that's the one that really breaks the cycle. An example, this is a PNG case study as well. It's in the coastal communities in the South Fly district area, which is on the border with Indonesia, Torres Strait, and just in that kind of transboundary area. There's a huge amount of overfishing that occurs there. The direct impacts are that because of the overfishing, there are fewer fish in the area, and the community is using reef bombing, so that's explosives on the reef, and so that's causing damage to the reef, so it's what they call reef bombing. The result of fewer fish is less cash, is less food for people, both because there's less cash, but also, so some of these you can see the indirect impact. You could actually even have an arrow that went here because it's less cash, less food, but it's also less food because there's less fish. Because there's reef bombing, there's less tourists. That has a negative loop back into no cash, and there's increasing conflict between the fishermen in the area. There's conflict over the fact that there are fewer fish, and so they're fishing in each other's areas, and there's conflict because some of the fishermen don't want reef bombing to happen, so because it's so detrimental to the reefs. So what are the causes of the overfishing? Need for cash. Fewer reefs, because a lot of the reefs there have also been impacted by climate change. There's been bleaching. And one of the big issues is the breakdown in local rules due to changes in customary law. And what are the indirect causes of that? Increased need for cash is fuel costs and more children. So people need more money because fuel costs have gone up and because they're having more children. Or they're having children. They're not necessarily having more children, but they need to pay for food for their children. Coral mining, so there are fewer reefs because there's been coral mining in the area as well, extraction of reef. And then finally, there are no local rules, so there's been cultural loss. So when you do the feedback loops, conflicts also caused by cultural loss, and this has had a huge amplifying effect. Previously in PNG, there were really strong cultural norms about when people could fish, what season they could fish, how much they could take out, what size of fish they could take out, and that was controlled by the community leaders and strictly enforced at the community level. And with the social breakdown in the customary norms, partly because there are fishermen coming into the area, but also because of the decline in fishing and people's desperate need to actually fish, and so then they overfish, so it becomes this vicious circle. It's created this lack of people adhering to the cultural norms in order to survive. The other positive feedback is the fact that there's fewer fish, there's less catch, so people then go and fish more. So you keep getting this cycle of people trying to fish because that's really their main livelihood, and increasingly overfishing in order to get cash. Interventions that have been identified in this area and are being implemented at this stage are: one, introduce local management that is strictly adhered to. And this local management is both done through the National Fisheries Authority, but also at a community local level. The second one is working with community leaders and with fishermen to try and restore some of those cultural norms that existed prior. So setting up governance structures at a community level, because the NFA, even though it does have regulatory authority in that area, it has very few people that it can actually enforce the overfishing. So you need to get the community leaders buying in and almost self-policing within the community. So working with the communities to set up local community regulations. And then the final one you might decide in order to break the cycle is population control. Now, so in our project, we haven't actually done that, but we have identified it as an issue, and NFA is talking to health. So this is where you start to look at, in order to break the cycle, you might need to bring in other partners. That you're not going to break the cycle of overfishing by just dealing with the customary laws and the fisheries authority, that you're probably going to have to look at a wider range of partners to change that. Just in terms of this goes back to the SDGs. If you see what what the kind of interventions we've done, you'll see that through the interventions on that project, it's addressing SDG 1, no poverty or decline in poverty. I wouldn't say no poverty. I think that's highly ambitious. Good health and well-being, that would be on the maternal health side if you bring in good family planning. Gender equality, that would relate back to the family planning. But it may also involve getting the woman involved in the local customary regulations, that women are more involved in those value chains. SDG 14, life below the water and life on the land, looking at alternative livelihoods on the land. And then, of course, setting up new governance structures, which is SDG 16, around justice and strong institutions. What we want you to do now is, if we go back to this, is to do an exercise where you basically take one of your issues and develop your own causal loop analysis. And through this process, what we want you to do is take one of your issues, one of the ones that you think would be the most interesting to address, or it might be the highest priority, or you can determine what the criteria would be for determining the issue. Determine the direct impacts and then the indirect impacts. Look at the causes. I would say that you're not necessarily going to do this in a linear fashion. You're going to not go, oh, we just do all the impacts and then the indirect impacts. You're probably going to go, oh, this is cause, and you can work on both sides. We're not saying you have to do it in this order necessarily. And then you look at the indirect causes, and then we'd like you to identify what the feedback loops are, and then identify what the interventions are to break the cycle.